It started with a sound that didn't belong in our lives, a sharp, rhythmic pounding that rattled the frames of the family photos in the hallway, the kind of noise that wakes you up not because it's loud, but because it's violent. Pine Valley Estates is the kind of neighborhood where the biggest drama is usually someone leaving their trash cans out a day too long or a dog barking at a squirrel. It's quiet, it's manicured, and at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, the only thing you should be hearing is the hiss of lawn sprinklers, not someone trying to batter your front door down. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee, feeling that morning grogginess, but that sound, that aggressive demand for entry, sent a jolt of adrenaline straight into my veins that no caffeine could ever match. And as I walked toward the entryway, I had this sinking feeling in my gut, a primal instinct screaming that the world was about to tilt on its axis. I swung the door open, expecting maybe a frantic neighbor or a delivery guy with the wrong address. But instead, I found myself staring at a wall of dark blue nylon, for men standing shoulder to shoulder on my porch, filling the space with an imposing, suffocating presence. They looked like cops, or at least, they were dressed to look like cops. Crisp uniforms, tactical belts, sunglasses that hid their eyes even though the sun hadn't fully cleared the tree line yet, and hands resting ominously close to the holstered pistols on their hips. There was no good morning, no polite introduction, just a heavy, pregnant silence that felt rehearsed, designed to intimidate, until the guy in front, a man with a jawline like a brick and a demeanor that screamed, "I'm in charge," finally spoke. "Step aside, sir," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "We're here for your wife. She's coming with us." Time has a funny way of slowing down when your brain can't process what your eyes are seeing, and for a split second, all I could hear was the rushing of blood in my ears, drowning out the distant chirp of a bird. I'm a law-abiding guy. I pay my taxes, I drive the speed limit, and my wife, Elena, is the most straight-laced person I know, so the idea of a squad showing up to arrest her was laughable. But the guns on their hips were very real, and that stopped the laughter in my throat. I looked at them, really looked at them, and something felt wrong, like a puzzle piece forced into a slot where it didn't fit, because there were no nameplates, no shiny badge numbers pinned to their chests, no paperwork in their hands, just generic uniforms and an abundance of attitude. "You've got the wrong house," I managed to say, gripping the doorframe, my knuckles turning white, trying to create a physical barrier between my home and these strangers. "Or you've got the wrong people, because this isn't happening." The leader didn't even blink. He just took a step closer, encroaching on my personal space. "Mr. Garrison, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Call her out now, or we come in and get her." Behind me, the floorboards creaked, a soft, familiar sound, and Elena's voice floated through the air, calm, steady, the voice she used when she was diffusing an argument, not the voice of someone afraid of being arrested. "Mark, what's going on?" she asked, and I turned just enough to see her silhouette in the hallway, and I told her, "They say they're here for you," expecting her to panic, expecting her to run or cry, but she just replied, "I'll handle it," with a coolness that sent a shiver down my spine. She stepped out onto the porch, pushing the screen door open, and the visual impact was like a sledgehammer to the chest for those four men. Elena wasn't in her bathrobe. She wasn't in pajamas. She was in her full sheriff's department uniform, her tan shirt pressed to perfection, the silver star pinned to her chest catching the morning light like a beacon, her shoulder radio crackling with the low hum of dispatch chatter. The dynamic on that porch shifted so violently you could almost feel the air pressure drop, the ground tilting beneath the feet of the four intruders, because they had come expecting a terrified housewife, and instead, they were staring down a verified, sworn officer of the law. You could see the doubt crack their tough guy facades, the way one guy's hand twitched away from his gun, the way another cleared his throat nervously, their eyes darting to each other behind those dark sunglasses. Elena didn't shout. She didn't scream. She just looked at them with the kind of authority you can't buy at a costume shop, and said, "You're pointing weapons at my husband. Holster them, now." The leader, desperate to salvage his crumbling control, tried to puff up his chest. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. We have orders." But Elena cut him off, tapping the badge on her chest, the metal ringing out in the silence. "ID on my belt, dispatch on my shoulder. If you were real officers, you'd know who I am. And if you're not, You're impersonating law enforcement with loaded weapons, which is a 10-year mandatory minimum sentence. So I suggest you think very carefully about your next move." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, broken only by the sound of a shutter clicking from across the street where Old Man Higgins was leaning on his mailbox, his phone raised, recording everything. The neighborhood was waking up, curtains were twitching, Mrs. Gable was out on her lawn in her robe, phone in hand, and suddenly, Pine Valley Estates had become a stage, and these four men were the villains in a play that was going off-script rapidly. Elena didn't wait for them to come up with a lie. She keyed her radio, her voice broadcasting loud and clear for everyone to hear. "Dispatch. This is Unit 7 Alpha. I have 4 unidentified subjects in dark uniforms at my residence claiming a warrant. Confirm active orders." The response from the dispatcher was immediate, loud, and utterly damning. "Unit 7 Alpha. Negative. No warrants in the system. Units are rolling your way. Copy 4 impersonators." The color drained from the leader's face so fast it looked like he was about to faint, his eyes darting left and right, looking for an exit that didn't exist, while the guy in the back just froze, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. Elena stepped forward, pushing me gently behind her, taking command of the space. "You heard dispatch. Drop the weapons, hands where I can see them, and wait for my deputies, or keep pushing and explain to a judge why you tried to kidnap a sheriff." Then came the sound, faint at first, just a whine in the distance, but growing louder with every beat of my racing heart. Sirens, real sirens, the heavy, mournful wail of actual law enforcement closing in. The 4 men heard it too, their postures crumbling, the aggressive tilt of their shoulders slumping into fear, but the leader, maybe out of stupidity or maybe out of sheer panic, tried one last desperate play. He barked, "Ma'am, we're not debating this. Step forward. You are under arrest." But his voice cracked, betraying him. Elena just smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. "On what charge? Produce the paperwork, show me the signature, or admit you have nothing." "Sir," one of the lackeys whispered to me, his voice trembling, "please move aside." But I just shook my head, feeling the anger replace the fear. "You walked onto my property and threatened my family. We're way past pleased." The sirens were screaming now, echoing off the perfectly manicured brick facades of Pine Valley Estates, screaming down the main avenue, and as the red and blue lights began to reflect in the windows of the houses across the street, Elena looked at the leader and delivered the final blow before the cavalry arrived. "Gentlemen, I've put people in cuffs for less than this: impersonation, brandishing, attempted kidnapping. That's a long list, and looking at you, I don't think you have the stomach for prison." The leader looked at his men, then at Elena, then at the approaching lights, and for a second, I thought he might draw his weapon, thought this might turn into a shootout on my front lawn, but then I realized something crucial. These weren't hardened criminals, they were bullies playing dress-up, frauds who thought a uniform gave them power, but standing in front of Elena, real power, earned power, they looked exactly like what they were. Cheap fakes about to be crushed by the real thing. The arrival of the real police was a symphony of chaos and precision, tires screeching against the asphalt as 2 cruisers drifted to a halt in front of our lawn, doors flying open before the wheels even stopped rolling. Deputies in 10 uniforms, the same 10 Elena wore, spilled out with shotguns and service pistols leveled, their voices cutting through the morning air with the kind of practiced aggression that makes your stomach drop. "Drop the guns. Now." Face down on the ground, they roared, and the 4 imposters, who had been so tough and stoic just moments ago, crumbled like wet paper, tossing their weapons onto the concrete with a clatter that sounded like surrender. Elena didn't flinch. She just stood there on the porch, a statue of calm amidst the storm, watching as her colleagues swarmed the men, forcing them into the dirt, cuffing them with the heavy, metallic snap of justice. "Dispatch. This is Unit 7 Alpha. Suspects detained. Scene secure," she said into her radio, and the confirmation rippled through the gathered crowd of neighbors like a shockwave. People were openly cheering now. Mrs. Gable was clapping. Phones were held high, capturing every second of the humiliation, and for a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, thinking it was over. But as the deputies were hauling the fake cops toward the cruisers, a new figure marched up the sidewalk, a man walking with the entitled stride of someone who believes they own the very pavement beneath their feet. It was Roger Sterling, the president of the Pine Valley Estates HOA, a man whose life revolved around measuring grass height with a ruler and issuing fines for unauthorized mulch colors. He was wearing his signature polo shirt tucked too tightly into khakis, face red and glistening with sweat, clutching a clipboard like it was a shield against reality. "This is outrageous," Roger bellowed, storming right past the police line, ignoring the deputies who turned to look at him with confusion. "You can't arrest them. They are on official business." Elena turned her head slowly, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Official business?" she repeated, her voice dripping with dangerous curiosity. "Yes." Roger puffed out his chest, trying to look taller than he was. "They are compliance officers from Tactical Enforcement Group, hired by this community to enforce regulations when residents like you refuse to follow the rules." He pointed a shaking finger at Elena. "You've been ignoring notices, and the board will not tolerate exceptions." The audacity was breathtaking. The crowd behind us gasped, murmurings of "he hired them," and "is he insane?" floating through the air. Elena stepped down from the porch, walking right up to Roger until she was in his personal space. "Compliance officers? Real compliance officers don't wear police uniforms, they don't wave loaded guns at civilians, and they don't claim to have arrest warrants from imaginary judges." "You're twisting this," Roger stammered, sweat dripping onto his collar. "They were just doing their job. They were impersonating law enforcement." "Roger," Elena snapped, her voice rising for the first time. "That is a felony, and you paid for it? You put this entire neighborhood in danger for an HOA dispute." "It was security measures," Roger yelled back, losing his composure, looking frantically at the neighbors who were now glaring at him with pure hatred. "The board approved it. Security doesn't involve pointing a gun at my husband," Elena shouted, and the raw emotion in her voice silenced him. And then, it happened, the snap. One of the handcuffed imposters, a guy with a jagged scar running down his cheek and eyes that looked too wide, too jittery, suddenly let out a guttural roar. Maybe he thought he could escape. Maybe he just snapped under the pressure, but he lunged, breaking the grip of the deputy holding him. With his hands cuffed in front, sloppy work by a rookie deputy, he swung his arms like a club, aiming straight for Elena's head, screaming, "You're coming with us." Time froze. Mrs. Gable screamed. I lunged forward, but I was too far away. But Elena? She didn't need me. She pivoted on her heel, calm as a surgeon, caught the man's swinging arms midair, and used his own momentum against him. There was a sickening crunch of bone, a twist of her hips, and she swept his legs out from under him, slamming him face first onto the porch steps with a thud that shook the wood. She dropped a knee onto his shoulder, pinning him instantly, and yanked the cuffs tight. "Assault on a police officer," she hissed into his ear, added to the list. The neighborhood erupted, not in fear, but in triumph, cheering for Elena like she had just scored the winning touchdown in the Super Bowl. The other deputies rushed in to secure the guy properly, but Roger Sterling stood there, pale as a ghost, realizing his compliance force had just turned into a violent felony right before his eyes. This wasn't supposed to happen," Roger mumbled, backing away. But Elena wasn't done with him. A deputy jogged over, holding a crumpled piece of paper he'd pulled from the scar-faced man's pocket. "Sheriff, you need to see this," he said, handing it to her. Elena unfolded it, and I leaned in to look. It was designed to look like a warrant, heavy bond paper, a gold seal, legal jargon about order of detention. But the signature at the bottom was a blurry mess, and the seal wasn't the county court. It was the Pine Valley Estates HOA logo. And at the very bottom, in fine print, "Prepared by Community Compliance Division, a subsidiary of Tactical Enforcement Group." "You forged a court order?" Elena asked, holding the paper up for the cameras, for the neighbors, for the world to see. "You printed a fake warrant on HOA letterhead." Roger's hands were shaking so hard, he almost dropped his clipboard. It's an administrative order. It's legal binding in this community. You are not a judge, Roger." Elena's voice was a gavel striking down. "You hired mercenaries to kidnap a sheriff because you didn't like where we parked? That is conspiracy. That is fraud. And you are done." The sergeant on scene stepped in then, looking at the document with disgust. "Sheriff, we ran this Tactical Enforcement Group. They're a shell company out of Houston. They've been flagged for harassment in 3 other states, terrorizing homeowners, but they've never gone this far. This looks like a pilot program for armed intimidation, and your HOA president here just funded their debut. I looked at Roger, really looked at him, and I didn't just see a pathetic little man anymore. I saw the face of a terrifying new reality, where corporations and petty tyrants thought they could buy their own laws, dress up thugs in costumes, and bypass the Constitution if they wrote a big enough check. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had orchestrated an invasion of our home. "You think this is over?" Roger whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and strange, delusional defiance. "It's bigger than me. You have no idea who you're messing with." Elena leaned in close, her eyes burning with cold fire. "Let them come, because I'm just getting started." 2 weeks later, the Pine Valley Estates clubhouse, a place usually reserved for dull potlucks and bridge nights, was overflowing. People were packed shoulder to shoulder, spilling out onto the patio, faces pressed against the glass windows. The atmosphere wasn't polite. It was electric, charged with the kind of revolutionary energy you usually see in history books, not in the suburbs. The story had gone national, headlines screaming, "Fake cops for hire," and HOA tyrant arrests sheriff. And tonight was the reckoning. Roger Sterling stood at the front of the room, but he looked smaller now, his polo shirt wrinkled, his arrogance replaced by the twitchy desperation of a trapped animal. He tried to bang his gavel for order. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, if we could just discuss the budget for the—" "Forget the budget," Old Man Higgins shouted from the back, waving his cane. "Talk about the hit squad you sent to Elena's house." The room erupted. Roger tried to stammer out an excuse. It was a misunderstanding, a security vendor issue. Elena stood up from the front row. She didn't need a microphone. Her presence silenced the room instantly. She walked to the front, plugged a USB drive into the projector, and without saying a word, hit play. The screen lit up with the footage from Mrs. Gable's phone. The pounding on the door. The fake uniforms. The gun leveled at my chest. The moment Roger admitted to hiring them. The sound of the fake warrant crinkling. The crowd watched in stunned silence, seeing the violence of it, the reality of how close we came to tragedy. When the video ended, Elena turned to the crowd. "This man," she pointed at Roger, "used your dues, your money, to hire criminals to terrorize your neighbors. He forged legal documents. He endangered every child on this street. This isn't about bylaws anymore. This is about right and wrong." Mrs. Gable stood up, her voice shaking but resolute. "I move to remove Roger Sterling as president, effective immediately." "Seconded," came a roar from 50 throats at once. "All in favor?" Elena asked. Every hand in the room shot up. It was a sea of raised arms, a unanimous rejection of fear. Roger slumped in his chair. His reign of terror ended not by a gun, but by the very people he thought he could control. The deputies who were waiting in the back, real deputies, stepped forward then. They didn't arrest him right there for the crowd. They waited until he was escorted out, humiliated, stripped of his power. And then, as the doors closed, we saw the cuffs go on. The relief in the neighborhood was palpable, like a fever breaking. Flags went up on mailboxes again. Kids rode their bikes without fear. We had won. Justice had been served in the most cinematic, satisfying way possible. But that night, as Elena and I sat on our porch, watching the fireflies dance in the darkness, the victory felt heavy. The news reports were still running. Tactical Enforcement Group was being raided by the FBI in 3 states. Hard drives were being seized. It turned out they had contracts with 12 other neighborhoods, 12 other Roger Sterlings who wanted their own private armies. "We got him," I said quietly, handing Elena a glass of wine. "It's over." Elena didn't sip her drink. She was staring out at the street, her eyes scanning the shadows. "Is it?" she asked softly. "Roger was just a customer, Mark. TG is just a vendor. But someone funded that startup. Someone designed those uniforms to be legally distinct but terrifyingly real. Someone wrote the playbook on how to privatize martial law and sell it to HOAs. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. I remembered Roger's whisper, "It's bigger than me. You think they'll come back?" I asked. Elena looked at me, and the steel was back in her eyes. "I think we kicked a hornet's nest. We embarrassed powerful people. We showed the world their pilot program failed." She took a sip of wine finally, a grim smile playing on her lips. "So yeah, they'll come back. Maybe not today, maybe not with fake cops, but they'll try something else. She reached out and squeezed my hand. But now we know who they are. And next time, we won't just be waiting. We'll be hunting. I looked out at the peaceful street, at the American flags waving gently in the moonlight, and I realized that while the movie might be over, the war was just beginning. And that leaves me with a question for you guys. When does community compliance cross the line into tyranny? If a private company can dress like cops and carry guns just because an HOA president signed a check, are we really safe in our own homes? Or was Pine Valley Estates just a test run for something much, much darker? Let me know what you think in the comments. Stay safe, watch your neighbors, and remember, sometimes the bad guys are the ones claiming to protect you. I'll see you in the next one.